I was halfway through closing my own pool for the weekend when HOA Karen called 911 and tried to have me arrested on my property. Yeah, you heard that right. According to her, I was trespassing in the backyard I paid for, maintained, and literally owned, but that wasn't even the crazy part. What started as one entitled neighbor screaming at me over a locked gate quickly spiraled into something much bigger, something involving forged HOA documents, an illegal land grab plot, and a secret Karen never thought anyone would uncover. I thought she was just another nosy neighbor with too much free time. Turns out, she was the tip of a very ugly iceberg, and the moment I discovered the truth behind her obsession with my pool, everything changed. Before we dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Then hit subscribe so you don't miss how this HOA meltdown finally explodes. When I first bought the house, the pool was one of the main reasons I chose it. After 25 years of grinding through construction jobs, side hustles, and more overtime hours than I care to admit, that pool felt like the universe finally handing me a win, a little rectangular slice of peace. My retreat, my I finally made it moment. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. The trouble started 3 weeks after I moved in. I remember walking out with a cup of coffee, expecting to enjoy the quiet morning, only to see a complete stranger floating on a neon pink pool lounger like she was starring in her own low-budget commercial. She had sunglasses on, drink in hand, and the kind of smug posture that let you know she thought the world should revolve around her. Can I help you?" I asked, halfway thinking she might be a previous homeowner or someone who genuinely got lost. She barely lifted her head. "Gate was open," she said, like that somehow made it normal. I blinked. "Right, but this is my yard. It's fine," she said, waving her hand at me. "We're neighbors. It's basically community space." That was the first time I ever heard her voice, and somehow, I already knew I never wanted to hear it again. I introduced myself, tried to set boundaries politely, and explained that the pool was private property. She sighed dramatically, as if I'd just ruined her entire vacation in Malibu. "It's just water," she mumbled. "You don't have to be so territorial. That should have been the end of it." I thought maybe she was just confused or overly friendly in the worst possible way. But no. Karen returned the next afternoon, and the next, and the next. Sometimes she brought a friend, sometimes two. Once she even rolled a cooler into my yard like I was hosting an HOA-sponsored pool party I never agreed to. Every time, I repeated myself firm but calm, "This is private property. You're trespassing. Please leave." And every time, she found a new excuse. "The old owners let us use it. This neighborhood has shared amenities. You really should lighten up." None of it was true, I checked. There were no shared amenities. The old owners had confirmed in writing that the pool was 100% private, and I didn't need to lighten up because I wasn't the one breaking into someone else's yard like a bored raccoon. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. I'd just come back from the hardware store when I found her in my pool again, this time with a pair of inflatable flamingos and 3 friends who looked just as uncomfortable as I was furious. I tried to stay composed. "Karen, we've talked about this." She stood up in the shallow end, water dripping from her elbows. "Look," she said, "if you can afford a house like this, you shouldn't mind sharing. It makes the whole community look better when people can enjoy it." "Karen," I repeated slowly, "this pool is not a community feature." She rolled her eyes. "Well, it should be." That's when I realized this wasn't cluelessness. It was entitlement. Pure. Undiluted entitlement, mixed with just enough arrogance to make it dangerous. I tightened security the next morning. New lock on the back gate, fresh security camera system, motion lights, the whole 9 yards. I even added a clean, bold private property sign, because apparently common sense doesn't work on everybody. For 2 days, peace returned. The backyard was quiet, no unwanted floaties, no Karen, no drama, just the hum of the filter and the rustle of my maple tree. It didn't last. On day 3, I heard the metal clanking before I even checked the cameras. A furious rattling, like someone was trying to shake the entire fence off its hinges. I opened the live feed on my phone, and there she was, Karen yanking at the locked gate with the determination of someone who had convinced herself she was the rightful owner of the Pacific Ocean. Her face was bright red, lips pulled tight, like she was about to explode. She paced back and forth in front of the gate, muttering to herself. I heard snippets through the camera mic. Unbelievable. How dare he? He can't do this to us. Us. Who was us? Because I certainly didn't remember co-signing a deed with her. Then, just as I was debating whether to go outside or call the police myself, she pulled out her phone, and that's when the scream hit. I'm calling 911. Of course she was. Within minutes, I heard sirens rolling down the street. 2 patrol cars stopped at the curb. Karen ran to them dramatically, pointing at my house like she was identifying a dangerous criminal. That man locked me out, she cried. He threatened me. He's trying to intimidate me. I stepped outside with my hands visible because I know how quickly this kind of situation can go sideways when someone is determined to lie convincingly. Good afternoon, officers, I said. Is there a problem? One of them looked between me and Karen, clearly already tired. She says you threatened her. I haven't spoken to her today, I replied. But I do have security footage of her trying to break into my gate. That got their attention. I played the footage. Karen's tantrum, her shaking the gate, her shouting, her attempt to bypass the lock, the whole performance. When the officers looked back at her, she froze like a deer caught in stadium lights. Ma'am, the older officer said, this man is the homeowner. He has the right to secure his property. You do not have the right to enter his yard or use his pool without permission, Karen sputtered. But he's doing it on purpose. He's keeping me out. Yes, I said dryly. That's sort of the point of a lock. The younger officer tried not to laugh. They warned her sternly that if she set foot on my property again, she would be arrested for trespassing. Karen turned an impressive shade of purple, stomped her feet like a toddler denied candy, and stormed off toward her house. But I knew her type. You don't get rid of a Karen with logic or legality. As soon as she slammed her door, I felt something shift. The air changed. The situation was no longer just about a pool, or a gate, or a misunderstanding. It was a battle line. And she wasn't going to stay quiet. I didn't know it yet, but that gate and that call would lead me into something much, much bigger. Something hiding inside the HOA, buried under paperwork, signatures, and secrets. And when I finally dug deep enough to uncover the truth, I realized Karen had a reason for wanting access to my pool, a reason she never expected me to discover. After that day with the police, I genuinely thought Karen would back off, or at least pretend to behave long enough for her embarrassment to fade. But no, if anything, she doubled down. The next morning, I found a neatly folded letter taped to my front door with the official HOA logo stamped across the top. I hadn't even finished my first sip of coffee before the irritation kicked in. Notice of community violation, the letter read in bold print. I squinted. Violation. Of what? My crime this time, according to the HOA, was restricting access to shared neighborhood amenities. My pool, my gate, my backyard, a place no neighbor, no realtor, no previous owner had ever claimed was communal. I reread the letter twice, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. Nope, it was real and signed not just by the HOA board, but specifically highlighted under the vice president's name, Karen Reynolds. Of course, I marched down to the HOA office that afternoon, letter in hand. The building was only a couple blocks from my house, glass windows, spotless landscaping, and the kind of faux welcoming decor that tried too hard to look professional. When I walked in, a middle-aged woman at the front desk gave me a polite smile that immediately deflated when she saw the letter. "Oh, you're him," she murmured. "Not sure what that means," I said, "but I'm here to talk about this." She didn't even need to look at it. "The pool," she sighed. "We've been hearing about that non-stop." "Well, then maybe you can tell me what exactly this so-called violation is, because last I checked, my pool is mine." Her lips twitched like she agreed, but wasn't allowed to say it out loud. "You'll need to speak with the board. They're in a meeting." "Perfect," I said. "I'd love to join them." She hesitated, then stood and guided me down a hallway. I could hear voices before we reached the door. Heated ones, familiar ones. "He can't just do whatever he wants," Karen snapped from inside. "If we let him lock the gate, what's next? People gating their driveways, fencing off shared spaces. That pool has been open for years." "Yes," someone else said, "but legally." "Legally," Karen cut in sharply. "We are the HOA. We decide what belongs to the community." I leaned into the doorframe, knocked once, and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Karen sat at the head of the table, pen in hand, posture stiff like she'd just been caught stealing cookies from a jar. The other board members shifted awkwardly. A man with silver hair, probably the president, cleared his throat. Can we help you? You can start by explaining this violation notice, I said. Because the last time I checked, my pool is not a shared amenity, Karen scoffed loudly. It is now. I stared at her. Come again. She crossed her arms. The HOA is authorized to designate community features. The previous owners allowed neighbors to use it. No, I said, they didn't. Her eye twitched. And even if they had, I continued, that wouldn't magically turn my private property into a public park. The president held up a hand to silence her before another outburst. Mr. Grant. That's me, I said. Look. Karen brought this issue up to the board. She says the pool was historically accessible, so we opened an internal review. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. There is, I agreed. A big one. The treasurer, a thin woman with glasses, cleared her throat nervously. Do you have documents proving the pool is private? I stared at her like she'd just asked whether I had proof my own shoes belonged to me. Yes, the deed, the site plan, the appraisal. Do I need to bring the water bill too? A couple of them exchanged looks. The president sighed. We'll need to review all documentation before issuing a retraction. Karen smirked like she'd already won something. We'll schedule an inspection, she said sweetly, to determine whether the pool should remain locked. I raised an eyebrow. You don't inspect private property. We do now, she snapped. If there's a dispute, no, I said calmly. You don't, and you won't. Not without a warrant, not without legal justification, and definitely not because you're mad you can't sunbathe on my water anymore. The silver-haired president pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen, let's step back. No, she said, voice rising. I'm not stepping back. He thinks he's above the rules. He moved in and immediately started changing things. This neighborhood has a culture, one where you freeload off other people's property, I interrupted. Her face flushed. You're being hostile. You called the cops on me for closing my pool, I reminded her. I'm allowed to be a little hostile. The president finally spoke with authority. Enough, Karen. The board will review the documents before taking further action. Mr. Grant, please submit copies tomorrow. I nodded slowly, but inside, something wasn't sitting right. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was determined, obsessed. And now, with the HOA partially entertaining her claims, the situation wasn't simply annoying anymore. It was dangerous. When I got home, I pulled out every document I had. The deed, title insurance, property boundaries, old construction permits from when the pool was originally installed. Everything was solid, crystal clear. No question, it was mine, but something was bothering me. The HOA was acting like they had paperwork that contradicted mine. That meant either they were bluffing or someone had been tampering with records. So I logged into the county's online property map, clicked my parcel, zoomed in. At first glance, everything looked normal until I noticed a tiny dotted line around the pool area, labeled Shared Utility Access. Pending update, pending update. I hadn't filed anything. I hadn't requested anything. Nobody had asked my permission for an update. That little dotted boundary didn't appear in any of my physical documents, but here it was on the county map. My stomach tightened. I dug deeper, opening old revisions of the same map, accessible through the county archive. The dotted line wasn't there 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10. It appeared only recently, and the descriptor, pending update, was dated 3 months before I even bought the property. Someone had tried to redraw the boundaries. Someone had tried to change my pool into a shared resource. Someone had submitted something to the county, and it sure as hell wasn't the previous owners. I checked the digital signature on the submitted request. My heartbeat paused. It belonged to an HOA board member, Karen's close ally, a man who had resigned from the board 5 years ago, meaning the digital authorization was impossible, forged. Suddenly, the violation letter didn't feel like intimidation. It felt like the HOA testing whether I'd push back, seeing if I'd roll over, seeing if I'd accept their interpretation of the rules, but they had already planned this. I scrolled further until I found an internal HOA proposal leaked through a public meeting summary. The document referenced a future project, Community Wellness Initiative, Phase 1. Phase 1 included potential acquisition or reclassification of shared pool facility. Shared pool facility, my pool, my backyard, my property. This wasn't about Karen wanting to swim. This was about control. This was about money. This was about the HOA positioning themselves to take quietly, slowly, legally something that had nothing to do with them, and everything to do with boosting property values and justifying massive HOA dues increases. Karen's tantrums weren't random. They were strategic. I sat back in my chair, adrenaline creeping beneath my skin. She wasn't just a loud neighbor with no boundaries. She was part of something bigger, something the HOA hoped no one would notice. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how far I'd go to protect what was mine. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, though I'd be lying if I said the thought of an HOA forging documents didn't put me on edge, but because I was angry, not the kind of anger that explodes out of you in one go. The quieter kind, the focused kind, the kind that makes you sit at your kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a legal pad, listing every inconsistency, every suspicious detail, every lie that suddenly made too much sense. By sunrise, I had a plan, or at least, the beginnings of one. But before putting anything into motion, I needed more than theories and screenshots. I needed proof, real, undeniable, legally explosive proof. The county clerk's office opened at 9. I walked through the doors at 8:58 with a folder under my arm and determination in my step. The receptionist was a thin man with round glasses and the weary expression of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with confused citizens and overdue tax bills. "Morning," he said. "How can I help you?" "I need access to property filings for Parcel 14B, I said. "Full history, digital, and print." He blinked. "All records, yes, everything." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "Give me a few minutes." He typed quickly, adjusting his glasses. After a moment he frowned. "That's strange. What is—" "Your parcel has 2 different boundary reports filed in the past year. One of them isn't showing as finalized, and the digital signature on the update request." He squinted at the screen. "This belongs to someone who isn't even listed as an active HOA officer." I played dumb. "Weird. Could be an old signature on file." He shook his head. "Nope. The county wipes expired signatures from our system once an official's term ends. That's protocol." End quote. Meaning the only way a former officer's signature appeared was if someone manually re-uploaded it. "Can I get a printed copy of both reports?" I asked. He hesitated. "Normally, I'd need a written request. But since you're the property owner, I can print them." 5 minutes later, I was sitting at a table with 2 maps laid out in front of me. The first showed my property exactly as it should be. Clean lines, accurate boundaries, clear labeling. The second was almost identical, except for the dotted line around my pool, and a notation declaring the area a shared use improvement zone. But what made my blood pressure spike wasn't the dotted line. It was a handwritten note at the bottom of the second map, pending HOA review and community vote. The date, 6 months before I bought the house. The previous owner never mentioned any of this, not one word, and that's because nothing had been finalized. The HOA had attempted to start the process but didn't actually have legal authority to follow through. When the previous owner moved, the initiative should have died. But Karen didn't let it die. She revived it, and she got sloppy. I scanned the old meeting transcripts the clerk provided. In an HOA meeting from the year prior, Karen had stood up and said, "If we want to move this neighborhood forward, we need shared facilities. That pool is wasted as a single owner feature." There it was, not even subtle. But here's where things got interesting. The president at the time, an older guy named Martin, had shut the idea down. His exact words, "Private land is off limits. We're not touching that." 3 months after that meeting, Martin stepped down, citing health reasons. The new president stepped in someone much more malleable, someone far more connected to Karen. And then, almost immediately, the forged signature appeared on the county filing. Everything clicked into place like puzzle pieces, snapping together. The fake digital signature, the mysterious dotted boundary, the community project proposal, Karen's obsession with the pool. It wasn't just entitlement, it was groundwork. It was strategy. I thanked the clerk, left the building, and sat in my truck for a long moment, breathing through the mix of adrenaline and fury flooding my chest. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a coordinated effort to take something from me, and they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd roll over, or get intimidated, or just accept whatever the HOA decided. Not a chance. The next stop was the county surveyor's office. If the HOA had been tampering with documents, they might have tried altering survey records too. The surveyor, a stocky man with a friendly beard, recognized my parcel number immediately. "Oh yeah," he said, flipping through a drawer. "This one came across my desk a few months ago. Did you approve an update?" I asked. He paused. "No. The request didn't include the required signatures." It got rejected. Signatures from who? The homeowner. He gave me a pointed look, and the adjoining neighbors. I nodded slowly. "So, the HOA can't request boundary adjustments without me signing, correct? They need you. Without your signature, nothing can be finalized." Meaning the only reason my pool wasn't already listed as a shared community feature was because someone's forged request hadn't gone through the proper channels. They tried to take my property, they failed, and they were now pretending I was violating HOA rules simply because I stopped them. I drove home with a file full of evidence. Real evidence, hard evidence, the kind that doesn't get brushed off with miscommunication or committee review. They played with legal fire, and fire has a funny way of burning the person holding the match. When I pulled into my driveway, Karen was already outside, standing on her lawn with her arms crossed like she'd been waiting for me. Her eyes narrowed. "You went to the county," she said, matter-of-factly. I didn't bother asking how she knew. HOA busybodies have a sixth sense for things that aren't their business. "I did," I said, "and I found some interesting things." Her jaw tightened. "Whatever lies they told you. They weren't lies." I cut her off. "But nice try." She took a step forward. "You can't fight the HOA. I can fight fraud," I said, "and I can win." Her face twitched. Fear or anger? I couldn't tell. Maybe both. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she hissed. "If you'd just unlock the gate like everyone else wanted." "Everyone?" I asked. "Or just you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned sharply and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But something in her reaction stuck with me. It wasn't just defensiveness, it was panic. Karen wasn't worried about losing pool access. She was worried I'd expose something. And she was right to be worried, because that night, as I reviewed the documents again, I noticed an overlooked detail, one that made this HOA mess 10 times more serious. The forged digital signature didn't just belong to a former board member. It belonged to someone who had been investigated before, someone with a record of falsifying HOA documents in another neighborhood, someone who mysteriously disappeared from public records 3 years ago, someone tied directly to Karen. This wasn't petty entitlement anymore. It was a pattern, a history, a scheme, and Karen had just become the face of it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers spread across my table. They thought they were clever. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I'd never dig deep enough. But I had, and I was just getting started. I spent the next 2 days gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I dug through email archives, printed screenshots, documented timestamps from the county portal, and backed up everything onto 2 separate hard drives, because people like Karen didn't just bend the rules, they broke them, and when cornered, they tried to rewrite reality itself. By the 3rd day, I had enough information to paint a very clear picture of what had been going on long before I moved into the neighborhood, but I still didn't understand why. Not the surface level, why the real reason, why my pool, why this plan. Why had the HOA quietly pushed a boundary change for a property they didn't own? That question gnawed at me until I stumbled on something I hadn't noticed before. Buried in the HOA's annual meeting notes from 2 years ago was a reference to a failed community project proposal titled the Ridgeview Wellness Expansion. It outlined an ambitious plan: yoga deck, spa area, small clubhouse, and community fitness zone. Guess what the centerpiece was supposed to be? A pool. A pool they didn't have. The HOA hadn't been able to fund a new pool construction, and the land they owned wasn't properly zoned for recreational water facilities. So they did what any desperate, overreaching HOA might do. They looked for a pool they could steal, and mine wasn't just convenient, it was perfect. Perfect location, perfect size, already built, already landscaped, right on the edge of what they wanted to market as the Central Wellness Corridor. My backyard was worth tens of thousands to the HOA. In future development value, maybe more. Suddenly, Karen's behavior made complete sense. All that nonsense about neighborhood culture and accessibility wasn't emotional reasoning, it was strategy. No wonder she pushed so hard. I wasn't blocking her swim time. I was blocking the HOA's entire expansion plan. The next step was to confront them formally, quietly, legally, without giving them time to bury anything else. So, I booked a meeting with a real estate attorney. His name was Tom Reeves. Tall, calm, mid-50 seconds, the kind of guy who had seen every HOA trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. He skimmed the documents I brought, eyebrows tightening as he flipped page after page. "This isn't just suspicious," he said. "This is illegal, multiple counts. Can we stop them?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Oh, we can do more than stop them. We can put them in a corner they can't climb out of." Tom explained the game plan clearly. First, we'd file a demand for records from the HOA under state transparency laws. They'd be legally obligated to provide every document, every vote, every correspondence related to the boundary adjustment. Second, we'd challenge the validity of the forged signature with the county and flag the filing as potentially fraudulent. Third, we'd notify the title insurance company, which would trigger their legal team to investigate because tampering with property boundaries can invalidate insurance coverage. And fourth, we'd give the HOA one chance to withdraw all claims and issue a written apology. If they refused, we'd sue. And we would win. Tom leaned back. "Trust me, Mr. Grant, they don't want this fight." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. For the first time since Karen stepped into my pool, I wasn't just reacting, I was moving forward. That evening, I emailed the HOA board, a formal notice requiring production of all documents tied to my property. I CC'd the attorney, I CC'd the county office, I even CC'd the previous owners, just for good measure. Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, there was a knock on my door, not a gentle one. I opened it to find the HOA president and 2 board members standing on my porch, looking like they'd just walked out of a funeral. Karen wasn't with them, which was either a blessing or a sign she was cooking up her own brand of chaos. "We need to discuss your email," the president said stiffly. "That's what I expected," I replied. "Come in." We sat at the dining table. The president cleared his throat. "This escalation isn't necessary. There's been a misunderstanding." "No," I said, "there hasn't. There's been a forgery. There's been a fraudulent filing, and there's been an attempt to reclassify my private pool as a shared amenity." The room went still. The treasurer looked pale. The president tried again. "Surely we can resolve this quietly." "That depends," I said. "Are you retracting the violation notice?" He exchanged a look with the others. "Pending, review, wrong answer, that's fine," I said calmly. "My attorney will handle it." The treasurer suddenly blurted out, "This wasn't my idea. I told Karen we shouldn't push it, but she wouldn't listen." The president shot her a warning glare, but it was too late. The truth was spilling out. "Karen told us the previous owner allowed community use," the treasurer said. "She claimed it was an HOA tradition." I laughed under my breath. "Karen lied." The president exhaled heavily. "We may have relied too much on her information." "Then you'll fix it," I said. "All of it. Every filing, every violation, every internal note referencing my property." The president folded his hands. "We'll review the documents and respond formally." "Great," I said. "Please do." They left looking like they'd aged 5 years. As I closed the door, a new feeling settled in my chest. Not relief, exactly, but anticipation. Something told me this wasn't going to end with a polite retraction. And I was right. 2 hours later, I caught movement on my backyard camera. Karen stood at the fence line, hands gripping the slats, staring into my yard like a wolf studying her prey. Then she noticed the camera, and she smiled. Nothing good ever begins with that kind of smile. The next morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. His name was Mike, mid-40 seconds, quiet, friendly enough, though we'd only exchanged waves before. "I thought you should know," he said carefully. "Karen's been talking to people, going door to door, saying you're trying to take away community resources." I stared. "My pool?" He nodded. "She told people you're planning to sue the HOA into bankruptcy, that you're selfish, that you're trying to change the culture of the neighborhood." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "I moved in 3 months ago. I don't even know what the culture is." Mike didn't laugh. "People listen to her. She's been here a long time, and she likes control." That last part wasn't news, but the way he said it, that was... I asked him what he meant, and he hesitated not out of fear of me, but out of caution. Finally, he said, "Karen has a history. This isn't the first time she's targeted someone, and the last guy who challenged the HOA, his life got messy real fast. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. Messy how? Let's just say, they found violations everywhere on his property. Fines, letters, threats, anonymous complaints. He eventually moved. I felt cold. You think Karen was behind it? I don't think, Mike said. I know. She bragged about it. For a moment the room felt smaller, tighter. This wasn't petty. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't one irrational neighbor throwing tantrums. This was a pattern of weaponized HOA power, and I was her new target. But Karen made one critical mistake. She picked the wrong guy. Because unlike the last homeowner she pushed out, I was digging deeper, and I wasn't scared to pull every rotten thread until the whole thing unraveled. And soon enough, it would. Mike's warning stayed with me long after he left. It didn't just linger, it rearranged the entire framework of the situation in my mind. What I thought was a single neighbor's obsession suddenly looked like a long-standing pattern of control, manipulation, and quiet retaliation. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was strategic. She didn't simply want something, she removed people who got in her way, but what she didn't seem to understand yet was that I wasn't going anywhere. That afternoon, I organized all the documents again, county filings, archived maps, meeting summaries, screenshots, and every piece of footage my cameras had captured. I made duplicate folders, backed them up across devices, and printed physical sets for my attorney. The more I looked at the evidence, the more one thing became clear. Karen had crossed lines long before she ever stepped foot in my pool. But now, I was going to make sure those lines buried her. The next official step was sending the HOA a legal demand letter. My attorney drafted it with surgical precision, polite, unwavering, and packed with enough legal weight to make a full-grown man sweat through his shirt. It demanded the board turn over every communication involving my property, any changes discussed in relation to community amenities, and any correspondence involving the forged signature. We gave them 10 days. They responded in one. At 8:17 the next morning, my inbox pinged with a message titled, HOA Records, Partial Fulfillment, Partial. That was never a good sign. I opened the attachment, expecting a few spreadsheets and meeting notes. What I found instead was a carefully curated collection of sanitized documents, things they wanted me to see, not the things I asked for. Missing emails, missing drafts, missing minutes from multiple executive meetings, and strangest of all, missing any reference to the boundary change proposal. It was too clean, too intentional. Someone had scrubbed these files. I forwarded everything to Tom, and within minutes he called me. They're hiding something, he said, and hiding things in response to a records request is a violation in itself. What's next? I asked. He paused. We push harder, and we make it public. Public. That word stuck in my mind long after the call ended. People like Karen thrive in the shadows behind closed doors, behind official signatures, behind rules written in language so vague it can be bent like wet cardboard. But the moment you shine a light on them, the illusion cracks. And that was the point of my next move. I created a shared online folder and uploaded every piece of evidence, every document, every screenshot, every county report, everything I had. Then I shared that folder with the entire HOA board, copying the neighborhood email directory. No commentary, no accusations, just the truth. An hour later, my phone started vibrating non-stop. 11 missed calls, a dozen texts, 3 emails titled, "We need to talk." But one message stood out. From a board member named Lisa, it read, "Can we meet privately? There are things you don't know, and I think they're about to get worse." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood, a neutral place. Away from HOA ears, she arrived looking nervous, checking over her shoulder before sitting down. She didn't waste time. "Karen's been manipulating the board for years," she said quietly. "Intimidating, pressuring, bullying. People don't push back because they know she makes your life hell if you cross her." I leaned in. "Why target my property?" Lisa exhaled. "Because Karen made promises, big ones. She told the board that if they supported her vision, she'd secure funding, get community backing, and move the HOA into a new era. She claimed she had connections with county officials. She even said she could streamline the process by filing documents herself, and they believed her. I asked. "She's persuasive," Lisa admitted, "and relentless, And, when she wants something, she digs in until everyone's worn down. I thought about the rattling gate, the screaming, the lies to the police. Yes, relentless was accurate, Lisa continued. But she also falsifies information. She brings in documents, claims they're from the county, and threatens to report board members who question her. People went along with it to avoid conflict. Did she forge the signature? I asked. Lisa hesitated, but not for long. She did, or she had someone do it. But it wasn't the board. Most of them didn't know anything about it. Do you have proof? I asked. She swallowed. I have emails, messages she sent me and others, plans, drafts, even voice notes. I didn't hand them over to your attorney yet because, well, honestly, I was scared. But after your email, it's all going to come out anyway. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until that moment. Lisa wasn't just a board member, she was a whistleblower. And with her testimony, everything Karen had orchestrated was about to implode. I thanked her, promised confidentiality until she was ready to come forward officially, and we parted ways. When I got home, the neighborhood was buzzing. People stood in small clusters, talking in hushed voices. A few shot me cautious glances. Others nodded with a kind of quiet respect. Karen, however, was nowhere to be seen. But her absence didn't last long. At 6:14 p.m., I received a notification from my backyard camera. I opened the feed just in time to see Karen marching across the grass toward my pool gate, not trying to break in this time, but pacing back and forth like a cornered animal. She didn't shout. She didn't shake the gate. She didn't even touch it. She stood there silently, staring at the pool like she could will it back into her possession. Then she turned and stared directly into the camera, not at the lens. Into it, like she was looking at me. A chill ran through me. Something about her expression was different. Not just anger, not just hatred. Something darker, something desperate. 5 minutes later, she was on my porch. I opened the door because I wasn't afraid and because part of me wanted to hear what she had to say face to face. "This is your fault," she said immediately, finger pointed at me like a weapon. "No," I replied calmly. "This is yours. You don't understand." She snapped. "The community needs this project. They're counting on it. And you," she jabbed her finger again, "you're ruining everything." "What project?" I asked, though I already knew. "The wellness expansion," she admitted. "The pool is essential. My pool," I corrected. She glared at me with a mix of rage and something that almost resembled fear. I did what I had to do. People don't listen unless you make them. "Forging legal documents?" I asked. Her jaw clenched. "You weren't supposed to find that." But I did. And then something happened that caught me completely off guard. Karen's face crumbled. Not with guilt, not with apology, with panic. "You don't understand what's coming," she whispered. "You think this is about the pool. You think this is about me." She stepped closer. "It's bigger than that." For a moment, the air between us felt sharp, electrified. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant. But before a word came out, she spun around and stormed back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I stood frozen on the porch, replaying her words in my mind. "It's bigger than that. Bigger than the pool, bigger than the HOA, bigger than Karen." Something else was happening, something she didn't intend to reveal. And now that I knew, I wasn't backing down. I was going to find out exactly how deep this went. Karen's last words didn't leave my mind for a second. "It's bigger than that. Bigger than the HOA, bigger than her obsession with my pool, bigger than forged signatures and doctored county filings." The more I replayed that sentence, the more it felt like a warning, not for my sake, but for hers. People don't panic like that unless something is collapsing behind them. The next day, I woke up to an email from Lisa. "I'm ready. I'm sending everything." Attached were 34 files. Emails, screenshots, board meeting drafts, and most damning of all, voice messages from Karen herself. I listened to the first one with my morning coffee, expecting entitlement, arrogance, maybe even rage. But what I heard was calculation. "We move forward regardless of homeowner consent," Karen said in one voice note. "Once the boundary change is approved, legal challenges will be too expensive for him to pursue. He'll give up." In another, "The board will vote how I tell them to vote. They always do." But the final recording, the one Lisa marked urgent, was the nail in the coffin. Karen's voice sounded frantic, almost feverish. "We need the expansion finalized before the audit. If they find out where the funds came from, or where they went. I'm done. Funds, audit, that was new. I forwarded everything to Tom. His response came within minutes. Call me, now. When he picked up, his voice was sharper than usual. This isn't just a boundary dispute anymore, he said. This is financial misconduct, possibly fraud, by Karen, by the HOA board, or at least the part she controls. That matched what Lisa hinted at during our meeting. But hearing it from a lawyer was different, he went on. I've reviewed the HOA budgets from the last 3 years. There are discrepancies, tens of thousands listed under community enhancements, with no corresponding projects, no receipts, no approvals, no records. I felt my breath catch. You think they use the funds to push the pool project? Or worse, he said. Karen may have embezzled funds and was hoping the expansion would justify the missing money once it was completed. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Karen didn't want my pool, she needed it. She needed a physical asset to show for the money that had already disappeared. If the expansion was completed, she could reroute the budget, bury the missing funds under construction expenses, and everyone would assume the money went exactly where it should have. But because I stopped her, because I locked my gate, because I pushed back, she had no place to hide what she had stolen. And now, that desperation I saw in her eyes, it made perfect sense. Karen wasn't fighting for power. She was fighting for survival. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Tom filed official notices with the county and the state oversight department. Lisa provided a sworn statement and handed over additional files. The previous homeowner confirmed in writing that the pool had never been shared. More neighbors reached out quietly, admitting Karen had bullied them for years. And then, the inevitable happened. The HOA called an emergency meeting. Not the usual monthly gathering with lemonade and a folding table in someone's driveway. A real meeting, formal, mandatory attendance. Every homeowner required to be there. The room they rented was the community center gym. They needed that much space. Word had spread fast. Whispers of fraud, illegal filings, boundary tampering. People showed up in clusters, talking in low voices. Some angry, some confused, some eager for a showdown. I walked in with Tom beside me. Not a soul tried to stop us. Karen was already there, standing at the front of the room with the HOA president, her arms crossed, chin lifted high in a brittle show of confidence. But even from across the gym, I could see the tightness around her eyes, the fear she was trying to bury. The president called the meeting to order. There have been accusations, he began, regarding the handling of property boundaries, financial records, and conduct within the HOA. A murmur spread through the room. He didn't finish the sentence. The side door slammed open, and 2 county officials entered. Accompanied by a deputy sheriff, the room went silent. Karen stiffened like someone had poured ice water down her back. One official stepped forward. We are here on behalf of the County Property Office and the Community Financial Oversight Committee, he said. We have received credible reports of falsified documents and misappropriated funds. The deputy unfolded a sheet of paper, a warrant. Karen's face drained of color. No, she whispered. This is a mistake. This is all a misunderstanding. But the official continued speaking, voice steady and resolute. Based on evidence provided over the last several days, including testimony from board members and the property owner, we have reason to believe that financial misconduct has occurred within this HOA. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The deputy stepped toward Karen. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. She stumbled backward. No, you can't arrest me. I'm the victim. She pointed at me with trembling hands. He orchestrated this whole thing. He tricked all of you. Ma'am, the deputy repeated calmly. Please turn around. Karen shook her head. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. The project it needed to go through, the audit. The words spilled out before she could stop herself, and that was it. That was the admission they needed. When the deputy took her by the arm, she tried to yank away, screaming now wild, desperate, losing every ounce of control she once wielded so easily. This neighborhood needed me. I did everything for you people, everything. Her voice cracked under the weight of her own downfall. Neighbors she had pushed around for years watched in stunned silence as she was handcuffed and escorted out of the gym. Some whispered, some shook their heads, some looked relieved. The moment she disappeared through the exit, the room erupted questions. Accusations, disbelief. The president tried to call for order, but it was pointless. Chaos filled the space Karen once dominated. And through it all, Tom leaned toward me and said quietly, "This is only the beginning. When the financial records are fully reviewed, others may go down with her." He was right. The coming investigation would unravel every thread, every shady vote, every missing dollar, every time Karen used the HOA as her personal hammer. But for the first time in months, I felt the knots inside me loosen. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived. 2 days later, the HOA issued a formal apology, retracting every violation notice ever sent to me. They suspended all board activities pending a full audit and appointed an interim committee made of neutral residents, including Lisa. My pool was mine again, my property was safe, Karen's influence was gone, but the biggest shock came when the county released preliminary findings. Karen hadn't just misused funds. She had embezzled nearly $40,000 over 3 years, payments disguised as consulting fees, maintenance projects that never existed, and community enhancement plans that stopped right where my backyard began. Every dollar she stole was meant to be covered up by the pool project, and every piece of her plan fell apart the moment I locked my gate. Looking back, it's almost funny. One small lock, one cheap camera, one pushback from a new homeowner, and the entire house of cards came crashing down. But I knew one thing for certain. If Karen hadn't pushed me hard, I might never have uncovered the truth. I might never have realized how close the HOA came to stealing part of my property. I might never have met neighbors who were ready to stand up for the first time. Karen's obsession with my pool ruined her, and it saved the rest of us. In the days following Karen's arrest, the neighborhood went eerily quiet. Not peaceful, just stunned. Like the entire place was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For the first time since I moved in, no one was peeking over fences. No one was complaining about lawn heights. No one was circling the block to take pictures for anonymous HOA reports. Karen's absence carved a hollow space into the rhythm of the community. After all, she had made herself the unofficial sheriff, judge, jury, and executioner of the neighborhood for years. And even though I hated everything she'd put me through, even though I had every right to feel triumphant now that she was being held accountable, I couldn't shake the strange weight pressing on my shoulders. Maybe it was the enormity of what had been uncovered. Maybe it was the realization that one person had been controlling so many lives. Or maybe it was simply because a part of me knew this wasn't truly over. The HOA audit began immediately. County officials and a private accounting firm combed through every receipt, every contract, every transaction the HOA made in the last 5 years. They found missing funds, falsified invoices, and vendor payments to companies that didn't exist. And the deeper they dug, the worse it got. Residents who had once defended Karen now turned on the board, demanding answers they'd never thought to ask before. Homeowners who had silently endured her bullying suddenly discovered they had allies. Some came forward with stories, little ones, big ones, humiliating ones of fines, threats, and retaliations she had inflicted on them. It was like peeling back a layer of wallpaper and finding mold underneath, spreading quietly in every direction. And through all this, I just tried to live my life normally again. I cleaned the pool, I barbecued in the backyard, I chatted with Mike over the fence, but every time I walked past the newly repaired gate, still locked, still sturdy, I felt a reminder of how close I'd come to losing control of my own home. One signature, one board vote, one forged document slipping past the wrong clerk. That was all it would have taken. One evening, while I was skimming leaves out of the pool, Lisa stopped by. Her shoulders seemed lighter now, the kind of relief people feel after finally speaking the truth they've held on to too long. "We're holding a neighborhood meeting next week," she said. "A real one this time, open discussion, no intimidation. About time," I replied with a smile. "We'd like you to come. People want to hear what happened from you. They want to know how everything started." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help, but because I wasn't used to being the center of attention. For months, Karen had painted me as a rule breaker, an outsider, a troublemaker. Becoming the person others looked toward for clarity felt surreal. But I owed it to them, and to myself. "I'll be there," I said finally. The meeting took place in the community center again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. No yelling, no accusations, no power plays, just neighbors, real people sitting on folding chairs, wanting to understand how their HOA, something meant to protect their community, had become a weapon. Lisa opened the floor, and, as promised, I told my story from the beginning. Not dramatically, not with anger, but honestly, with the same steady voice I used the day I confronted Karen through the fence. People listened, not the distracted, half-interested listening of HOA meetings past, but with full attention. When I reached the part about the forged documents and the boundary manipulation, a collective gasp rippled through the room. When I explained the connection to the missing funds, whispers erupted, but the moment that truly shook them was when I described what my attorney said, that if the boundary change had gone through, the HOA could have seized control of my pool, legally, and charged the neighborhood thousands to maintain something that wasn't theirs to begin with. The treasurer, now sitting in the front row as an ordinary resident stripped of her title, covered her face with her hands. After I finished, no one applauded. No one cheered. They just sat there in stunned silence, absorbing the truth like sunlight after a storm. Then, slowly, a man in the back row stood up. "I'm sorry," he said. Then another woman. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Then Mike, "Thank you for standing your ground. You saved us all." And, one by one, the room filled with small but genuine acknowledgments that made something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. The HOA reorganized after that meeting, not repaired, rebuilt. A neutral third-party oversight committee was appointed until the audit concluded. New elections would be held, transparency rules were implemented, and, most significantly of all, a rule was passed unanimously. Any attempt to alter the property boundaries or amenities of a homeowner must include the homeowner's written consent, a third-party survey, and a community vote, a rule born directly from my battle. As for Karen, her court date came quickly. I attended not out of spite, but because I needed closure. She arrived looking smaller somehow, like the weight of her own lies had compressed her. Her confidence, once limitless, had evaporated. She faced multiple charges: fraudulent filing, tampering with public records, misappropriation of HOA funds, harassment, false reporting, trespassing. I listened as her attorney tried to mitigate the damage, but the mountain against her was too high, too steep, too solid. When the judge sentenced her 18 months in county jail with restitution payments to the HOA, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. The storm had passed. Life settled into routine again. Neighbors waved more genuinely now. Kids rode their bikes without parents worrying about Karen popping out with a clipboard. People started showing up to meetings, taking responsibility for their community instead of surrendering it to a single overbearing voice. And me? One Saturday afternoon, I floated in my pool for the first time since the entire mess began. Sun overhead, quiet breeze rustling the trees, the water cool and peaceful. It felt like reclaiming a part of my life I didn't realize had been stolen. As I closed my eyes, I thought about everything that had happened, all because one person believed she was above the rules, and everyone else believed they were powerless to stop her. It took one person to break the cycle. Someone stubborn enough, calm enough, prepared enough, and angry enough to fight back. I didn't plan to be that person, but I'm glad I became him. If this whole ordeal taught me anything, it's that silence is the soil where people like Karen grow. HOAs, like any system of authority, only work when the people they represent stay involved. The moment you step back and let one voice dominate, that voice becomes a hammer, and eventually, someone gets hit. Stand up early, question everything, protect what's yours, and don't be afraid to shine a light where shadows grow. I shared my story not just to expose what happened, but to show that one homeowner pushing back with truth, with patience, with evidence, can stop an entire machine built on intimidation. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Drop your story in the comments. And if you want more wild HOA tales like this, make sure you subscribe, because trust me, there's always another Karen out there.